Okay, we're in chapter 4, page 51, page 51. Just next week we will have class. However,
okay, we're in chapter 4.
Whoa, quiet.
Page 51.
Class is going to take place next week upstairs, and we're going to start at 9:30. We got an event at 10:30 that I have to be at, so we're going to start at 9:30. So in this chapter, we're talking about the idea of his bonanus or hit bonanut, which is meditation, contemplation, which translates intellectual ideas into emotional experiences, or as we've been discussing, the idea of das, knowledge. Knowledge is not intellectual, it's experiential. So when we fully comprehend something, it can remain intellectual, but if we invest ourselves through the process of his bonus, through meditation, we cause the you can take a copy, or you can take a book. Just write Chabad Intown in the inside of the book. Yeah, we're going to start with that. So let's start at the bottom of 48, 49. From the mind, from the brain, it is drawn down to the heart. That it becomes engraved and felt in the heart. That is, that the heart hears and feels the godly idea which was comprehended in the brain. Good morning. You can take a book to write on the inside, Chabad Intown, please. As we mentioned, this is through the attribute of das. Das, knowledge, is the attribute that converts intellect into experience, into feeling. And that becomes in the heart divided into two categories: emotional attributes of love and awe. Right? So, as we discussed, depending on the type of personality, you might internalize a godly idea into an idea, to the feeling of wanting to get closer to God, or you might experience that as an expression of awe. When a godly idea is manifest, it shines in the person's brain. So the brain becomes excited, becomes animated by this idea. Whether it's with love or with awe, according to the person's comprehension and the amount of meditation that they've invested. As we discussed also last week, that is the awakening, the excitement of the intellect. Right? The intellect itself has the capacity for intellect. And then the heart also draws after the brain. Because in the brain you have the capacity to draw the heart, that the heart itself should be excited from the brain's excitement. So this is the way we're created. That when the brain gets excited about something, it pulls the heart to that excitement. And this component of das, right? We know that there's chachma and bina, wisdom and understanding. Das, which we translate as knowledge, is a bridge. Because on the one hand, it is intellectual, but on the other hand, it's also experiential. When we know something, we know it in the totality of our being. At least the type of knowledge we're talking about here. The goal is to experience that which we know in our brain. I was listening to a class recently on a related topic that does someone have to prove to you that you're alive, or do you know that you're alive? In other words, even if you don't know what it means to be alive, right? You can't explain it intellectually. It's a given. You know that you're alive, and you feel that you're alive. When you comprehend a godly idea, and your intention in the meditation is to experience that, so then the heart is drawn after the excitement of the brain, and it too begins to feel that which the brain is excited about. Does that make sense? This ought to resonate on some level with all humans that ever explore intellectual ideas. That's how we operate.
With good poetry or good music, good song, something that goes into your senses and resonates in your heart.
Yeah.
It's just an emotional thing, something wrong with that.
Yeah, good. Another parallel that resonates with me is the idea that as we develop more self-awareness, right? And how do we develop more self-awareness? We do that, ideally, we do that through study, right? You read new brain science, and as you begin to study more of this, it begins to resonate more with you. What does it mean to resonate? First, it resonates in the head, and then there's like this awareness that enters into our experience that intellectual idea applies to me. Let's take a simple example. The Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya at length about this is actually related to the class that I was listening to. So let's actually try this as an exercise, right? So I'm gonna briefly teach you the point that is discussed in this other discourse, and we're gonna talk about it for a moment as an intellectual idea, and as we're discussing it as an intellectual idea, you'll begin to experience that this is not some abstract idea that is in a book, but it actually is applicable to us. Okay, so come along for the ride. So we have, the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya that there's a godly soul and an animal soul, right? Where there are two beings that are part of our consciousness. There's a part of us that is driven towards connection with God. In other words, it has no self-interest. It has no self. Its whole identity is God. And then there's the animal soul, which the entire existence, the entire focus of the animal soul is the self. It's preoccupied with self. We have a new security company today, and just paying attention to the door. Okay, there we go. And the Alter Rebbe tells us that because we are of two souls, because that's the identity, is that we're made up of two souls. You may have to let her into come on this side, because she's going to have to get through the door there. You can use my phone. Just tap it on by the hallway door. We're keeping the doors locked today. Because we have, if we were one soul, so then when we were to do something that is not good, we can feel shame around it. But since we're two souls, so it's not the I that's doing, it's not the true I that's engaged in that negative thinking or negative speech or negative behavior. It's the animal soul. So that's a liberating idea, that we're not defined as one entity. We're a little schizophrenic.
Sorry.
We're a little schizophrenic, right? We have two personalities inside of us, a godly personality and an animal personality. So the question is, if we have a godly personality and an animal personality, who's choosing? Who's making the choice? Right? You're faced with a a choice. Let's go extreme. You're faced with a moral choice. The animal soul wants to do the immoral thing because it's an interest of serving itself. Thank you. You can take a book if you like, and you can write Chabad Intown on the inside. The body wants to do the immoral thing because its only interest is self and self-gratification. And the godly soul wants to do the godly thing. So how do we navigate that? You ever wonder? How do we navigate through this choice that's in front of us, this fork in the road? Anybody? Okay, so the thing is that actually the more you lean into the body, which is what you're saying, I sleep, I let the body, which is good, but all you're doing is you're feeding the body. Right? You're feeding the body, you're not rising above the body. So the question is, how do we rise above the body?
Must be all because it's physical or animal soul like that.
Okay, so how would you navigate that?
I guess
you're on the right track.
I'm saying do something that comes from animal soul. It doesn't mean like you make soup or something and give it to somebody. That's a mitzvah. It's not,
but
it's
what?
not like
fair. The animal soul can be harnessed. The question is, how do we harness it? So you wake up in the morning, and your body wants to sleep, and your soul says, "Let's get up and pray." So you're stuck in this battle between the two. How do you decide? How do you navigate what to do?
Think about it.
Beautiful. You think about it. You use your intellect. So there's a third soul. Welcome to the third soul. The third soul is called the Nefesh HaSichlis. That's what this discourse that I'm studying is about. The intellectual soul is neither godly nor animal. It's a rational soul. The intellect has the capacity to have a conversation with the animal soul and to say, I understand you want to sleep, but how are you going to feel when you finish sleeping? You're just going to feel like you got more sleep. And there's more to life than just sleep. I don't know what, but no, I'm just kidding. There's more to life than just sleep. So if you listen to me and we get out of bed and we go and pray, you're going to feel even better. And not only are you going to feel better, but actually, you're actually going to live a more lofty life. So, and by the way, sometimes with the animal, we have to actually discipline the animal and say, hey, we're going to do what the godly soul wants. But even then, it's the intellectual soul that's telling the animal soul that it's going to do what it needs to do. The ideal is to have a conversation with the animal soul. Like we say in the daily prayer, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right? That's the godly soul talking. Acknowledgement of the one God. And then the Shema continues, and you shall use this awareness of the oneness of God to v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, to love Hashem your God. B'chol levavcha, with all of your hearts. The Talmud says, b'shnei yitzirecha, with both of your inclinations. Not only to love God with your godly soul, but to love God with your animal soul as well. How do you move from Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, the awareness that God is one, to love, to the animal soul, to loving? So Chassidus tells us all over the place that the v'ahavta, to bring ourselves to a place of love, comes through contemplation. When we contemplate, when we use our intellect, we can convince the animal soul that even though it's always going to remain an animal, but that it's in its interest to do the godly thing. Sometimes that's a function of, hey, you don't want to get caught, right? You don't want to do the bad thing because you might get caught. But ideally, the real transformation is when you tell the animal soul that it's in its interest to do the more lofty thing. Speak up.
Processes that build trust, that you're practicing faith, you're working out faith and trust by taking steps towards. That happens in the body. It involves the rational mind, and it certainly has the goals of the godly soul mind. So, when you're engaging in that trust, is that who's driving that ship at that point, or is it kind of the joint effort?
So it's always the intellectual soul that's driving the ship. That's where choice lives. The trust is built when the animal soul actually does what the rational soul tells it to do and experiences, hey, yeah, it felt better not to do the sin and it felt better to do the right thing. Let's take on a very mundane level. The rational soul says, yes, you can eat the chocolate cake and you're going to feel good. But if you don't eat it, what do they say? There's nothing that tastes as good as skinny, right? You're going to feel better by not eating the chocolate cake. So the animal soul realizes, hey, okay, there's something more than just self-indulgence. Now, the next time it comes along, depends on how activated the animal soul is. It might be more easily influenced by the rational soul to do the right thing, and it might not, because it's always going to remain an animal. But the idea is that over time, if you have a pet, like a dog or a cat, you can't really have a conversation with it, but you can discipline your dog or cat by putting it outside or whatever else people do to train their animals. You can offer a reward and so on. It begins to realize, hey, okay, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's still an animal, and that's why the king in the body, the king of decisions, is always going to live with the rational soul.
That continues to function in certain ways, even without command, even without, if you're able to train through repetition, through the building of trust, through faith in God, and you have a well-trained animal that is used to doing these things, it's still an animal, but it's well heeled, it's well trained.
Yes.
And at that point, even if you don't have somebody driving the ship, it's not an intellectual process. You're in an hour that, off your schedule, like, oh, this is the thing that we do, like your animal soul's doing the thing.
Yes, but it will always be an animal, and therefore you always have to be looking out for it. It's still going to be an animal no matter how well trained it is, and therefore if you're not involved in a constant spiritual practice, you're always susceptible that the animal, because the animal is doing what's in its interests. What you've convinced the animal is that it's in its interests to do the right thing. And it does become easier over time, but it's still an animal. And therefore, if you're not on the watch, if you're not on the alert, the animal is susceptible to becoming an animal again. So this whole idea is not related to our discourse, but it was to demonstrate the idea that you can have an intellectual idea that I suspect now on some level resonates with all of us, right? This is not an abstract idea. It's a very personal idea, and it resonates with all of us. Okay. Resonating is not the same as knowing. Now, what do I mean by knowing? That the next time you face a choice, that where your body immediately goes is, okay, I've got this battle going on inside of me, and I've got the tools to navigate it. I've got this intellectual soul that's empowered to navigate this conflict that the body is experiencing. This conflict between the godly soul and the animal soul. Now, if you were to take an hour this afternoon, close your eyes, and meditate on this idea, you're going to experience it in a more real manner. You're going to experience this in a more real manner. You're going to feel it more. And the more you meditate on it, the more you contemplate, the more it's going to be natural to you, so that the next time a choice comes up in front of you, you're naturally going to navigate to a place within yourself. I know what's going on. I know that right now my animal is triggered. I know that my godly soul is pulling me to one direction versus the other direction. And I am using my intellectual soul to navigate this. You could take a book if you'd like. Take a book if you'd like.
Possible. Or just cornbread
an intellectual soul that's more complicated than the animal soul, or is it like, you know, like nature versus nurture, or is it something like?
Right, Chabad in town on the inside. Right, Chabad in town on the inside.
All right, Chabad in the inside?
Yes, please.
Oh,
The answer is absolutely. And some people are born with a less coarse animal soul. Some people are born with a more refined godly soul, or a more sensitized godly soul. And some people are born with a greater intellectual awareness. Each of us are given exactly what we need for life's journey. 100%. Yeah. Because each of us have a purpose on this earth, so we're given exactly what we need in order to navigate that journey.
ego is basically the animal soul,
Correct. The ego is the animal soul.
By another name.
Yes. By many names. Yes.
They have like a emotional great mind and a reasoning mind and a wise mind. So they wanted to like eventually integrate the emotional mind and the intellectual mind to become more wise.
Yeah. So DBT, for example, for the most part, leaves the godly soul out of the equation, right? It's really animal soul and intellectual soul, and it's really fundamentally the animal soul. That's where most of that therapy lives. Where IFS, internal family systems, which I've shared before, is actually about the awareness. It's really about das. It's about, in other words, DBT is about how do I control, how do I change the behavior of the animal soul. It's like taking your puppy to a trainer, right? You take the puppy to a trainer, so the trainer knows what to do to harness the animal so that the dog knows what to do, the cat knows what to do and what not to do, and so on. But that's just training. What the IFS does is it brings awareness to the totality of our experiences, that I have these different parts working within me. I would say that for the most part, IFS still is working primarily with the animal soul, but it's really about das. It's about knowledge. It's about really feeling the different parts of who I am and recognizing what's at play in this moment. Because we're very susceptible when we get triggered to say, oh, what I'm experiencing now is my godly soul, right? We become very, in the name of self-protection, in the name of our moral, leanings or whatever it might be, we're susceptible to justifying that what I'm experiencing is godly, when in reality it's just a different form of the animal. The animal is a very sophisticated, the human animal is a very sophisticated creature. And it can convince us to do the wrong thing for all the right reasons. But the reality is it's still an animal. And the way to discern is by recognizing, okay, that part of me that just woke up is the animal. And my intellectual soul has the ability to have that conversation to anchor the self, to anchor the godly soul, and ultimately the action or the speech or the thought that I'm going to engage in into godly. But again, the purpose of all this is to emphasize for us the idea that an intellectual idea can remain intellectual. I gave you an idea that naturally lends itself to the human experience. But if we were to talk about the idea of God encompassing the world and God filling the world, it might be something that you might feel is very abstract. So you have to contemplate it. You have to meditate on it. You got to break it down. You got to personalize it. So first, the brain does that, and it gets excited about it. And then eventually it trickles down into the heart, and the heart personalizes that experience. And that's done through the intellectual soul. Good? Piece of cake. Middle of 50-51. Umashichas in the parentheses. Umashichas halev yesh gam bekatnas hamoichin. There is also the drawing of the heart that exists when a person is in a place of immaturity of the mind. Now that could be an underdeveloped person, or it could be in a state when the mind is not in its highest form. One could contemplate the intellectual idea, the intellectual godly idea, in a general and encompassing manner. In other words, it doesn't necessarily have to be a very personalized experience. A person can be contemplating it on a general way, and that itself will draw the heart towards that idea. However, the disadvantage of doing this when one is only engaged in it in a very general way, then I don't want to minimize anybody's intellect here, but what we just did, right, in sharing the idea of the rational soul was a very immature analysis. I don't mean it wasn't real. It just was very immature. It was very, very peripheral, right? So therefore, you might have identified with it, your heart connected with it, and by the time you leave this room, it'll be something of the past. Why? Because you didn't invest yourself in it. It's like, as we said, it's like hearing an exciting sermon on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and it lasts about until after till the bagels are served, right? And then it goes. Why? Because you didn't invest yourself in it. You got excited about it. It was an intellectual idea you heard from the rabbi, and your heart followed the mind, and it got excited, but you didn't invest yourself in it, so it's not sustainable. You're not going to experience true emotional excitement. So we have excitement in the brain, and we have excitement in the heart, and this experience of feeling drawn to the heart, to the intellectual idea, is a very peripheral one. Even the idea that the heart gets excited from the excitement of the brain is when one when the excitement is a comprehensive one with great expansiveness. As we said, one truly invests themselves in the intellectual idea and truly invests themselves in the meditation on it. So then in the brain, it's with great light. It's truly captured in the experience of the brain. And since it's truly captured in the experience of the brain, so therefore, then the drawing of the heart is a truthful one. So then the heart becomes a medium to bring the light to actually be sensed in the heart, that the heart should be awakened and excited by. You can take a book, right? Chabad Intown on the inside. That the heart will be excited with love and fear of God in a very revealed way. Which is not the case when the light shines in the brain only in an encompassing fashion. Even though one is awakened in the heart, that the heart draws after the brain, it still remains in an encompassing fashion. And therefore it disappears and immediately leaves. It's as if it never was there. Page 53. Then you have yet a lower level, where the mind is truly in an immature state, where the heart doesn't draw after it at all. You're completely disconnected from the intellectual idea. That's would apply, for example, by a child who doesn't have the faculty of das, doesn't have this faculty of knowledge. As a child lacks self-awareness, right? So since a child lacks self-awareness, you can teach them an idea that makes a lot of sense to them, but it's not me. I'm not talking about me. We're talking about an idea. It's not personal at all. Because according to the quality of the light that shines in the brain, so it is in the heart. Let's pause for a moment. Is this resonating? Is this landing?
that puts me in a child that's not yet developed, so that he doesn't have awareness.
You tell me. What part of the brain? We have Chachma, Bina, and Das. Das. The Das is lacking. Das, it's actually it's a very powerful point, because what is Das? Das is awareness, right? A baby has no awareness. We
Self-aware.
self-awareness, like a consciousness that I exist, right? When our youngest, our twins, were babies, we would put them in a crib together. They would often sleep together, and they would roll over each other, slap each other, whack their hands, and it wasn't. They didn't even have awareness that there was another creature next to them. We're blessed now with 2 grandsons that are about 3 months apart, and it's cute for us. We got 2 grandsons, and we put them next to each other. Just now, they're beginning to recognize that there's another person, which is fascinating, because they recognize people, they recognize adults that are talking to them. You smile to them, they smile back, but when they're with each other, it's almost like they don't exist. It's a fascinating thing. What is that? It's a lack of self-awareness. Do you know when your self-awareness becomes fully developed, when the Das is fully developed? Anybody? It's a basic scientific reality. When does awareness fully set in? When the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, which is how old? 25, 26, yeah. Huh?
I thought you were going to say I'm trying.
That would be wonderful. Which is why you see teenagers do a lot of stupid things. No, I mean that. The same stupid thing that a teenager would do, a 30-year-old wouldn't do. Why? Because they don't. There's a lack of awareness that there's actually a result to this action. Right? That's why we have laws around certain age limits, 18, 20, right? It's just, there's a certain, actually, this brings to mind an example of scientifically also proven. When you've been driving for a certain amount of time, right? I bet most of us got into the car this morning and drove here without even realizing what we were doing. It's just so ingrained in us. You get into the car, you turn on the engine, and you hit the gas pedal. You're not saying, "Oh, I need to hit the gas pedal now. I have to use the brake now." Right? But when you're first start learning to drive, you have to do that. Not only that, when you're driving down the road, subconsciously, you're recognizing that there are cars around you, and therefore you can't go into that lane. It happens as second nature, because the awareness is so set in that you don't have to be thinking about it. It just it instinctively. Now imagine if we could bring our awareness to what's going on inside of us to such a level. I'll give you another example, another very real example. And this might resonate with some, it might not resonate with others. When you wake up in the morning or in the middle of the day and you find yourself having a lot of anxiety, I don't mean clinical anxiety, you're unsettled. Where do you go in that moment in your thinking? What are you telling yourself in that moment? What are you doing with that anxiety? So some people try to identify it, right? And what is the identification? What have you identified? So sometimes you say, I'm anxious because my boss just said something to me. I'm anxious because I'm hungry. By the way, even when you're anxious because you're hungry, you're not anxious because you're hungry. Why are you anxious when you're hungry? So each person has a story around that. Right? Why are you anxious when your boss says something to you?
Thinking of the future.
So for some people, they're thinking about the future. For some people, they're thinking about the present. For some people, they're evaluating their self-worth. For some people, they're saying, "Oh, I'm worthless. I can never do the job right." For some people, they're saying, "My boss is such a blank." For some people, they're saying, whatever it is. But there's all kinds of stories that each of us has that feeds the anxiety. But if we don't have that self-awareness about to pause and say, what is this anxiety about? We're just going to go do whatever we need to eliminate the anxiety. We're either going to go to a place of self-judgment and just say, I'm worthless, and you're going to be depressed the rest of the day, or you're going to go and eat some food because it'll make you feel better for a few minutes, or you're going to go take a walk because you know that a walk clears your mind, clears your spirit. You may go meditate, right? But none of that is really, and some of that helps, but none of that is really what's going on. What's going on is that we have a narrative around whatever it is that we're experiencing. Now, what happens when it's not the boss? You just, middle of the day, you find yourself anxious. There's an unsettledness inside yourself, or you wake up in the morning and you're unsettled. So a lot of times we're just going to say, oh, I didn't sleep enough, or I slept too much. It's part of our programming. It's a combination of genetics. It's a combination of upbringing. And it's a combination of, during this period of time when our prefrontal cortex is getting developed, we take a lot of things in from our environment. All of that shapes the story that we come to believe about ourselves. And therefore, it triggers happiness, and it triggers anxiety, and it triggers all kinds of healthy and unhealthy things.
Speaking of animal soul and godly soul, which one would?
It's all animal. It's all animal. It's all animal. You need so when you have that anxiety, so the first thing you need to do is have awareness. The awareness lives in the intellectual soul. By the way, the awareness is driven by the godly soul. If we choose to take the time to have awareness, it's driven by the godly soul, because the godly soul wants us to live higher. So the godly soul says, listen, sweetheart, I know you're anxious. So gesund. I know you're anxious, but let's try to figure out what's going on here. Because if you're just going to ride on the anxiety, you're going to go do something that's going to feed your animal. So let's try to figure out what's going on here. And sometimes we say to the godly soul, thanks but no thanks, I just want my addiction. I'm just going to go indulge in whatever it is that's going to make me feel better. But hopefully there's a battle now started. The godly soul is saying, hey, let's figure this out because there's something else going on here. And the rational soul, the intellectual soul, can step in and have a conversation and say, okay, what's triggering this anxiety? Where is this coming from? And hopefully get some awareness around it. And then with that awareness, we can make a choice not to go scream at the boss and not to get defensive, but to try to figure out how we can move through the discomfort. Yes.
So all this is that you're just saying is self-effort. And in those moments where you feel like pressing into something attached to your purpose, I won't be here. I want this from you. Wait in the discomfort, whatever it happens to be. But it can cause anxiety, it can cause discomfort. I would assume that's it requires an awareness to parse where that comes from. But the ultimate reaction is an animal soul reaction, even if it's discomfort between communing with God, with your God. So.
Yes, 100%. It's a very complex system. And here's the beauty of it. And this is revolutionary from Chabad philosophy. And that is that the purpose is actually the animal soul. The whole objective here, to quote a line from my yoga teacher, is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. When we can realize part of the rationalization is why should I try to navigate the anxiety as opposed to just indulging in whatever is going to make me feel better? Why should I? The answer is a godly one, because your purpose on this earth, the godly purpose, is to find godliness in the anxiety, to find God in the animal. That's the first thing. So because the objective is to find God in the animal, so I have to pause. I've got to figure out what's going on here. And by the way, sometimes God is not found with an answer in discovering what the anxiety is, but just being okay with being not okay, just being in the discomfort. And when you could be okay in the discomfort, you know what happens to the discomfort? What happens to the discomfort? Speak up. Payman. It becomes normal. It dissipates. It's the judgment that we have of our discomfort that keeps it going.
Oh, there used to be a book I used to read, Zig Ziglar.
He's a big businessman or something? Yeah.
He had a famous line that says, your attitude determines your altitude. So a lot of this goes back to when he asked the question. You go back to DOS when we started all conversation, but it's how you filter things when you're hit by something that determines where you go, up or down.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So it just reminds me of.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize again, thank you. I want to emphasize to navigate this journey just from a therapeutic standpoint is helpful. But if it's just therapeutic, it misses the boat. That's why Torah and Chassidus are so important, because what it tells us is that this is not something you got to get rid of. This is not something you need to just figure out how to navigate. This is your purpose. This is the purpose. You were born, put into this world. The Torah was given to us for this purpose. God is hidden in the anxiety. God is hidden in the discomfort. And unless you're going to invest yourself in figuring that out, you're going to miss the boat. You just deal with it therapeutically, like with DBT, which is great because all of these things help. But if all you're going to do is try to figure out how to harness the animal, you're still at war with yourself. The goal is not to be at war with yourself. The goal is to figure out how to navigate yourself. It's a different language. I'm not here to fight with my animal soul. I'm here to elevate the animal soul. You shall love Hashem, your God, with all your hearts, with your animal soul too. You're not going to love God with your animal soul by disciplining it. You may have to do that initially, but that's not the end game. The end game is to bring the animal soul into a place of loving God. And you're only going to do that when the animal comes to realize through your rational soul that it too is part of the equation. And not just part of the equation, that's the intention. The soul was put into the body for the body. And not just to eat food for the sake of heaven, but to deal with the most deepest parts of who we are. And by the way, this is a gift of our times. I mean, it's also the painful challenge of our times. It's a very difficult reality. You know, people look at the very emotional state of humanity today, and they're very judgmental of it. Oh, all the kids today, they're so emotional. They're actually living in a very messianic way. This is the ultimate. We did not historically have the luxury of doing this work. We didn't. On a material level, we didn't have the luxury of doing this work because we were just trying to survive. You got to go get the water from the well, and you got to milk the cow, and that's it. That's if that's all it was. Then you also had to worry about the Cossacks and the Nazis and the Spanish Inquisition. You had to, we were constantly on the run. Now we live in a world where we have, thank God, expansiveness. We have all the materialism we could possibly need or want. So we have the luxury of letting our emotions bubble up. Okay, now it's time to work with it.
Animal soul, but then it's a purpose within that anxiety, is what you're saying.
Always. Yes. Now, again, sometimes people have clinical kind of stuff that needs to be addressed. But
How this soul doesn't fall with this process of this anxiety so that you realize there's somewhere you have to go, something else you need.
it is. it's the driver that lets us not stay in the animal. If we didn't have a godly soul, we would always go to the anxiety and figure out how to make ourselves feel better. Using the 12 steps principle, right? What is every addict? If you read was it Dr. Bob's book? Tells the story, but anyway, there's the famous story. My brain is blanking on me for a second. His name was Epi. What was his name? Epi? The story of AA. There was a guy named, I think his name was Epi, if I'm remembering correctly, and came from a wealthy family somewhere in New England, and he was a drunk, and they sent him to, not to Freud. Who was the other guy? Jung. They sent him to Jung. Crossed the sea. He went to Jung, and Jung said to him, and he did treatment with Jung for whatever it was, a month, 6 weeks, and he was healed. And he went and he got his ticket to go on the ship back to America. And while he was waiting to board the ship, he went to a local bar and got drunk again. So he came back to Jung and he said, it's not working. We got to figure something out. So Jung said to him that you need to have a spiritual experience. The only way you can recover from this is to have a spiritual experience. Anyway, long story short, he came back to America. He was part of a group of Christian, like purists. Anybody know the name? Not Puritans. There's a different group. No. Again, I'm not fresh on the details. It was a group up in New England, and I'm sorry, Oxford. Thank you, the Oxford group, and he talks about how, going to these Oxford group meetings, he had a spiritual experience, and he began his recovery, became sober, and never drank again the rest of his life. And then he met with Dr. Bob out somewhere west, and anyway, they started AA. Years later, maybe this was, when did Jung pass away? Anybody? Pull your Google out, whatever it was. I think it was in the 50s, maybe the early 60s. So somebody said to Epi, like, you had this Jung inspired this whole thing. Why don't you go back? What did you ever tell him what's become of it? There's millions of people now in AA. So he wrote him a letter, and this is the last known letter from Jung. Oh, so is Bill Wilson. Listen to this letter. I mean, it's right on topic here. He says like this. Dear Mr. William, your letter has been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland H. anymore. Roland H. was the guy who went, and often wondered what had been his fate. Our conversation, which he has adequately reported to you, had an aspect of which he did not know. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that those days I had to be exceedingly careful. Just that idea, those days. Back then, this letter is 1961. He died shortly after this. Those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I had found that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland H., but what I really thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. Listen to this line. It's mind-blowing. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. Let me say that in the language we just used here. The anxiety that we experience, which is an addiction, right? Because we look to shed the anxiety, but there's a discomfort that we're looking to shed. It is on a low level of the spiritual thirst for being wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. And he has a footnote, and he quotes from Psalms chapter 42, verse 1. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. So in English, what that means is like this. What it means is like this, that when I'm experiencing anxiety, or discomfort of any kind. We're just focused on anxiety. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be discomfort, it could be temptation, whatever it is, whatever intense emotion is coming from the animal is telling us, I want to connect with God. I don't know how to do that. So give me food so I don't have to feel this anymore. Because, by the way, when you feed an animal, it calms down until the next time it's hungry, until the next time the anxiety bubbles up. So we feed this yearning, this low-level spiritual yearning, which according to Chassidus is not low level, but the highest level, right? Our animal is saying, I want to be connected with God. Stop treating me like an animal. I want to do things that are godly. Okay, that's a lot of hard work, but that's what's going on. When we understand that, now who's pulling the animal away from its animal state to look deeper? That's the godly soul. The godly soul is saying there's more here than just self-indulgence. There's more here than just depression or anxiety. So now we have a tension, right? Because again, if we didn't have the tension, we would just indulge. So we have a tension. How do we resolve this tension? Enter the intellectual soul. The rational soul begins a conversation and says, okay, I hear that we need to make purpose out of this. We got to figure out what's really going on here. Let's talk to the animal. So let's have a conversation. What are you anxious about? Where does that come from? Let's try to navigate this. What's going to make you feel better? What's really going to make you feel better? It's mind-blowing, huh?
I'm not necessarily talking about something as if that is. If you can take it to its fullest extreme, so your focus day, self-flagellation, extremes. But on some minor levels, there's a subtle difference in thinking on a daily basis between.
You speak a little louder.
Sure, like without going to the extremes of like your opus days of like self-flagellation. Because I think that on a daily basis, there's a struggle between endurance and discomfort for the sake of growth and the acquisition of suffering as a form of, as an addictive source. Like this is a way that this is a coping mechanism that it's intentional. That you're introducing suffering, or you're allowing a regular practice of suffering for the purpose of coping with this. It's almost, it seems like an addictive form of like you would drink alcohol, but it deals with suffering. It's intentional suffering. And I think that I've seen it in myself, seen it in other people, that there's a subtle balance between the two. Where do you think that dividing line is, and what tips meaningful endurance from what differentiates?
It's a very, very deep question. So I think we have to contextualize the notion of accepting suffering, right? It's at its high level, accepting suffering is an acceptance that what I'm experiencing is by divine design. It doesn't mean I have to be happy with it. And there are certain experiences of suffering that, God forbid somebody is in a deep, deep illness, or has a loved one that's ill, or loses a loved one, and so on and so forth. These are very deep, painful experiences. It is true that it's by divine design, and the believer navigates into those painful experiences, not to say it's okay to be in pain, but to still ask the question, what is my purpose in this? So the idea of suffering is, the Baal Shem Tov says, a small hole in the body is a large hole in the soul. So we're not to glorify pain and suffering, but when we encounter it, that's why we never choose to bring it on. But when we encounter it in our lives, the way to navigate it is to ask, what is God's purpose for me in this? So whether it's anxiety or whether it's something outside of ourselves, and there's there's one story that's coming to mind is I had a cousin who was diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately passed away, and he used the time that he was in the hospital. He believed that this was by God's design, and therefore he used the time in the hospital to influence doctors. He would speak to the doctors. He would put on tefillin with doctors. He made meaning out of it, right? That's Viktor Frankl's line. So this is this. I think I heard recently it's not Viktor Frankl's line. He borrowed it from somebody else. Anyway, but the point is that so the notion of suffering as the objective is not in the Jewish thinking, even though it was in the past. But that was also in big part a way to break down the animal soul. So really our job is to navigate within that. I want to finish up the chapter where I'm in the middle of 53. Second paragraph. U'kanira bachush, like we see, he uses the word empirically here. Shemiyad sheyispol hasechol shebemoyach be'eza davar, mashahuchsher moed b'moichai, that when a person fully comprehends an idea in their brain, and then the intellect gets excited about it, miyad yumshach gamalev pisay machar hispayla zay shebemoyach b'liyagia klal. The heart immediately gets excited about what the brain got excited about. There's no pause. But immediately, on its own, without effort, the heart gets excited about that which the brain was excited about. The work is not in the heart. The work is in the brain. The meditation. You use your brain to meditate and contemplate, the heart will naturally follow. You can't activate the heart in the heart. You could activate the heart in the heart, but it's not real. If you activate the brain fully, the heart's naturally going to follow, and it's going to be real. That's because the brain has this power to draw the heart after it, which, as we've been discussing, because that is the element, the component, the level of das. Knowledge, because it has both an intellectual component and an emotional, it's a bridge between the two, that it draws the heart to become awakened and excited about the very thing that the brain is excited about. In the brain, when the das gets excited, the heart also has excitement in a concealed way, in an unfelt way. This is actually very new for me. So, in other words, when the brain is getting excited, what he's telling us is that the heart is actually what's getting excited, but its manifestation is in the brain. In the heart, it's not revealed yet. That's why it appears to be excitement of the mind. But when the heart is drawn after the brain, that it goes from below to above, then the light comes from above to below, in a very revealed way, in a literal revealed way in the heart, in a palpable way. That is that the godly idea that was excited about in the brain is now engraved and felt in the heart. Summary of this chapter, he explained that the true service is to toil with the brain, with great intense focus. And then the heart will naturally become excited, which is the idea of the drawing of the heart after the brain. Yes.
How does it settle? How does it grow roots and blossom? To use a bad metaphor. It's the one influences the other, and then it begins to take root, and it becomes part of you. How does it benefit?
Very slowly and over a lifetime. So the reason we pray every day, I was actually learning a discourse this morning about the nature of Shabbos. We have this gift called Shabbos, And the gift of Shabbos is that spiritually, there's divine revelation on Shabbos that is both a result of the work that we do in the week before, and then it's an empowerment for the week after. The spiritual work that we do in the week before. In other words, just as on a basic level, the material work that we do on Shabbos, the material work that we do during the week becomes elevated on Shabbos, right? So you have all this output, and then on Shabbos, you're able to rest and look back and say, oh, it was a good week. And that rest itself becomes an empowerment for the week that follows. Spiritually, it's the same thing. All the spiritual work that we put in during the week on Shabbos becomes elevated. And then that elevation then activates a response from God, and we become empowered that the next week should also be good, if not better. The work is constant. And we have little victories. It's an important idea. We don't get big victories. We have little victories. And sometimes those little victories help create subtle change within ourselves, greater awarenesses. And the more we do that, the more we're able to be more intuitive when the challenges manifest themselves, to know what's going on inside of us, to utilize the right tool to navigate it. But as we said, the animal remains an animal. So no matter how much you've practiced this, no matter how much you've mastered it, unless you are meant to be a tzaddik, which means that you eliminate the animal's desire for self-interest, which very few people ever attain that, we're always going to have self-interest. And the body will always put the self first, which is why we got to pray 3 times a day. We got to study Torah. We got to kiss the mezuzah on our way out. We got to do these things, the spiritual practice, which keeps us anchored. Because as soon as we stop that spiritual practice, the animal's going to dominate again.
In some of this discussion, there was purpose, so I think it's terms, because I'm kind of simple, I think simple is not best, but so if it goes to anxiety, or we're talking about illness, is that God communicating that there is a purpose that you need to do something? Right?
Yes,
Is that what you're saying?
that there's something there to be discovered.
Something that's how God's communicating to you, basically.
Yes.
Also sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all this process helps you hopefully understand that or see it, so you can do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right on target.
Consistent journeys, but to live it, to be it, and hopefully then grow and grow along.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be all within yourself. So
The challenge is not in the way. The challenge is the way. It's a lot of work. All right. Have a great week. Again, reminder, next week we are